Hello everyone, welcome back to the Django REST Framework tutorial series. So for this tutorial, we're going to continue off from the installation and we're going to create our very first request. So hopefully we're all ready for this continuation, and let's strap in, boot up our VS Code, and let us start coding. So let's get started. Here in this tutorial, last time we were able to pretty much install everything that we needed, but we still have quite a bit of setup to do. So the first thing you need to introduce is this requirements.txt. So for the requirements.txt, right here, you're able to see the libraries that you installed. So this is pretty much something that's akin to maybe your npm init, or pretty much just a library manager that gives you information on what you need to install the project. So later on, maybe you'd want to install this in a different system. This is perfect for knowing what you need for this right here. So in order to do that, we are going to refer to our terminal, and let me just drag it up right here. There you go. And just note that you need to activate your terminal first, or activate your virtual environment, in order to access this pip freeze, since of course by default it will just show you what installations you have in the whole system. In this case, the virtual environment will work in a folder. So here, let's just type in pip freeze. Okay, and this shows pretty much what we've already seen in the requirements.txt. So there you go. So I could do the manual way and just select everything right here and put it into a certain text file. But of course, what if it is a bunch of them? What if it's a bunch of libraries? So that may not be the best form factor to work with. So what we're going to do here is type in pip freeze along with a greater than sign right here, along with a greater than sign or a closing angle bracket, and we're going to say the certain requirements that we need. There you go. This is the requirements.txt file, and that will pretty much put everything into that requirements.txt. Okay, so let's hit on enter. And that pretty much just refreshes what I already have in here, but in your case, most likely you're able to create a requirements.txt. So there you go. Now you're ready to pretty much show this to the world. But there's actually one more thing that I'd like to share, and that is having a git ignore. So for git ignore, I actually have a little link right here to share with everyone. Here you go. Let me get that right here. And here you go. So this is straight from djangowaves.com. You can feel free to search it up and just hover over everything in here. That pretty much covers all your bases in case you are going to push this into a certain site that will hold it, much like Git or GitHub. So here, just copy everything, and what we're going to do is create a file that we call the git ignore. So ignoring files in our Git helps us in filtering out things that we may not want to share with the public. So it's very helpful in saving private data or things that we don't really want to put in our Git. So here's to create a new file. We'll call it .gitignore. Hit on enter and paste it right there. There you go. Perfect. So that pretty much sets us up for pushing to Git. In case you want to learn about Git, of course, if you have that experience, feel free to push this to your GitHub, and you should be good to go to share this with people. Okay, so here, the git ignore has a bunch of things that maybe we don't really want to talk about right now, since it's pretty much just covering all our bases. And our main focus is going to be Django. So let's go back to actually creating the Django project. So what we're going to do first is create an application. So for the application, what we're going to do is hopefully still remember the Django admin commands. So what we're going to say in here is, what we're going to type is Django admin start app, and then we're going to type in the name of the application. In this case, we're going to name it something like person in order to signify that it's going to hold a person kind of model. There you go. So person, and let's hit on enter, and it should generate something like this. There you go. So this pretty much generates a typical application that you would see in a Django project. Of course, we're not going to need all these files since when we're working with our REST APIs, we pretty much only need to work with data. So what we're going to do here is just leave it as is. We're just going to work with the models.py for now. And for now, let me just drag this down. Here you go. And let's go and work with models.py. Okay, so there you go. And now in here, we're going to pretty much dictate what details we need to talk about a certain person. So when we think of a person, most of the time we deal with details like first name, last name, and age. So we'll stick with those details for now. But if you want to add in more fields, then feel free to do so. Okay, so here we're going to create our model, and in order to start that off, we're going to start off with class, and then the name of the class, or the name of the model, and then we're going to need to inherit something from the models library. Right here, we'll say models.model in order to create a schematic for our data. Okay, so let's start off with the details for this person. So once again, we're going to need details like the first name, the last name, and the age. Okay, so we're going to create the fields for these accordingly. So we'll just keep things pretty simple. For the first name, we're going to most likely deal with the character field since it's going to be a string to refer to a person's name. Okay, so here let's start off by typing in an equal sign. And we're going to say models.charField to generate a character field for the first name. And we'll say the max length, we'll just keep it a little short. So for the max length, let's say it is something like 50. Okay, and for our last name, there's also going to be kind of a character field as well, but maybe they're going to have a longer last name. So let's say character field right here, and we'll put in a max length of 100. All right. And lastly, we have the age. So the age normally deals with whole numbers. So you could say models.integer field, and maybe we could do something like min. There's just a little test though. I'm not sure if this one will work, but we could have a little workaround later on if this doesn't work or if this attribute doesn't exist. So of course, still have to do a little bit of trial and error sometimes. And in this case, the age, we're just trying to have something that has a minimum age of 1. Okay, so there you go. That's for the person. And all we need to do now is, there you go. What we're going to do is manage.py, make migrations. Okay, so currently that's not going to work because this actually needs to be put inside of our tutorial or our core. So here we actually need to install the person. So for this, if you try and run it right now, nothing happens. So we actually need to import or install this application into the project. So what we're going to say is put in the name of the application, person, and there you go. We should be good to make migrations, and we have another error right here. So it looks like the min is not a valid argument. So let me see an alternative that we could do here. Okay, so I'll just remove the min here, and we're just going to make it a positive integer field. Oh, let me just remove the duplicate at the end there. There you go. So in this case, we're just going to make it positive instead, so they won't have a value that's lower than 0. So that should work for now. That should be good to go. Okay, and that is for our person. We've successfully created a first name, a last name, and an age for this person. Okay, so what we're going to do now is let's try and migrate once again. Make migrations, and that should be good to go. Perfect. Now what we're going to do next is to activate these migrations, since currently this is just a save state. So in order to activate this migration, we're going to say python manage.py and migrate. All right, so that should be good to go. So you can see all those right here. Those are just all from the default project. But what we need to really look at is the person 01 right here. If that is okay, then we are okay. All right. So currently we could run the server, but that is just going to show the default page right here. So let's try that out. Let's say if I try and run the server. Oh, we'll say manage.py run server. Okay. So if we try and open that up right now here on the side, you may notice that it just puts us on the default page. Of course, we don't want that. We are trying to do some REST requests. So let's try and close this for now, or I'll just put this back into my other screen, and let's do a bit more setup since we're not yet done. So we've created the model, but we don't have the view or a certain interaction for us to do the requests. So to do that, let's exit out of here. You can do Control-C, and let's do another Django admin command to start an application, and we're going to call it API. Okay, so you can kind of see where this is going to go right here. This API is going to be the middleman for the user sending a request and the person model. So here, this also generates like a typical Django project or a Django app. So what I'm going to do for this is I'm going to remove some unnecessary files. So here, pretty much all we need is the views. So I'm going to take care of all of those and delete them all. Okay, so now we're only left with views. Okay, so that should be good to go. And I'm also going to put in a urls.py in case I want to put the views into our Django project. All right, so that should be good to go. So let's do some coding. Let's go to our views.py real quick. And what we're going to do is we're going to have different kinds of imports because we're not going to be dealing with Django on its own. We need to put in the REST framework views. So to do that, we're going to start off with from REST framework, making sure that you have this installed, REST framework, and then we're going to import in something from a specific library. We're going to get response, and we're going to import response. Since REST framework has its own way of responding to requests, we need to get that specific method. So we need to import that in for latent. Okay, so if you have that response good to go and ready, next thing we're going to do is import something else. We're going to get something from REST framework once again, and this is going to be a decorator. So a decorator we're going to get is API view, and for decorators, they are pretty much signifying what certain functions do. So in this case, API views will say that certain functions are meant to be views for our REST API. So these could be for things like get requests, post requests, patch, delete, pretty much any request that could be handled in REST API. So we're going to show what that decorator looks like later on. Okay, so we also have some more imports to do. We also have this right here. We have from person.models. So we need to be sure to actually import in the model we're going to interact with. In this case, we're going to import person. There you go. And we're also going to import one more thing in here, but for now, we're going to leave it for later. I'll just put in a little comment for something that we call serializers. So serializers, I'll go into a bit more depth with that later on. But for now, let's move on to how to create an API view. So for the API view, we start off with the decorator. We'll say @API_view, and we're going to get from the list of options what kind of request we're going to do. So here we're going to say brackets, and then in quotes, we'll put in get. Perfect. So we still see a red line right here. So that means we still need to create the function for this get request. So for this, let's start off with a def to define a function, and we'll say get data. So this will be perfect for us to do a GET request. For now, just leave it as pass. And we're going to deal with this request later on, since we can't get any data yet if there is no data existing. So let's create a post request right here. And what we're going to do is we're going to create another function for this. We'll say def and we'll say add item with a request parameter. So we're also going to let this pass. So you can actually see here we have nothing in the get data parameter, but in the add item, we actually have a request parameter. So for the get data, we actually don't need to have any data from the user to get all the data in our model. But for the add item, we need to know the details of the person they want to add. And that's why the request is there. The request contains the data that we need to create a person. Okay, so that should be good to go. So what I'm going to do first is prioritize add item, because once again, we can't get any data if there is no data existing. So let's do add item and save get data for later. Okay, but for now, we'll save those requests for later on. We're going to touch up on the serializer. So for the serializer, what we're going to do is create a separate file once again in our API folder. We're going to call it serializers.py. So let's do that real quick. Okay, so I've made the file right here. And serializer is meant to kind of filter out the data in our view. So if we are going to deal with models later on, this is perfect for that. So here I just imported something from the REST framework. This is serializers. And I'm also going to import in the models from the person app. We'll get the person from there. And there you go. So we are ready to check for the data and pretty much filter out or serialize data in case we need certain parts that need to be removed, or we need to show certain parts to a user. So here we're going to do the same thing as how we usually do. We'll create a class, and we're going to call it person serializer. And here we're going to inherit serializers.model serializer. Essentially, we're going to deal with data from a model. And for this, inside of this, we're going to have a class of meta. This is for metadata that is being dealt with inside the model. And for this class, what we're going to say is some information that may be needed for the serializer. So we'll start off with the model. And for the model, we're going to say person. All right. So this is going to be the model we're going to work with for the serializer. And we also need to specify the fields. So for the fields, we could either put in a certain list. Right here, we could even say something like first name if we just want to show the first name. But for now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a certain method or a certain value that we call dunder all. Essentially, you could see the dunder or the double underscores on the left and right side. And this will tell Django to say that I want all the fields from this model in this serializer. Okay, so that should be good to go. And we should be ready to create our very first request. So let's go and do that. Okay, so I'm back in the views.py, and I'm going to say from.serializers, or we could say serializers. No, it should be .serializers because we're referring to our own project. So the dot refers to our own project right here. And we'll say import and person serializer. Perfect. All right, so now I could use the serializer to filter out data coming in or coming out of the server. So we'll say add person for this, not add item. There you go. Okay, so we'll deal with the get data later once again. We'll deal with add person for now. So what we're going to do is go here and let's start off by creating a serializer for this, and this serializer will assign a serializer for this API. So this will validate the data. So here I'm going to get the person serializer, and we're going to pass in some data to the serializer. So I'm going to say data equals request.data. Perfect. So this is going to check for errors, and we'll check if it is going to be valid to create a request. All right. So that serializer should be good to go. So what we're going to do now is make sure that it is valid. So to check if it is valid is actually pretty simple. So there's actually a condition to do that. We could go here and say if serializer dot is valid, and that's actually a function. So we'll say with parentheses, and then we will save this serializer. So we'll say serializer dot save. So if it is valid, we are going to save that change and add that person to the model. Okay, so once that is done, we're going to go to the next line, and we're going to say return response serializer.data, just to see what we were able to add onto the page. All right, so that should be good to go. And if it will not have a valid data, then most likely the serializer.data will pass an error. Okay, so that is for our add person. So all we need to do now is make the URLs and connect it. So let's go to our URLs real quick. For our URLs, let us import from Django, right here, .urls. We're going to import path, essentially creating a path for our views. And we're going to get from our project, we're going to get the views.py. All right. So we're going to use these in order to create our routes for our resources. So what we're going to say here is URL patterns is equal to a certain list. So if you remember, that's the format for a list of URLs. For now, let's add a path, which will have a parameter of add, and we're going to have views.addPerson if they go to that certain URL. Perfect. So we now have this URL patterns, and we are ready to go to link this to our tutorial or our core project. So this URL is still stuck in the app, so we don't have access to that yet. So let's go to our urls.py in the tutorial folder. And here, let's include something on line 18. We're going to say include because we want to get all the URLs from a certain resource. So in this case, we're going to get the URLs from our API. So we'll say path, and we'll leave it blank for now since we want them to access it from home. We'll say include API.urls. All right. That should be good to go. We're just going to have them access it right from the get-go. So we're not going to put a certain URL string for them to access these URLs. So we'll say include API.urls, and that should be good to go. All right. So here we've just added the add into our page. So all we need to do now is run the server and see if we're able to access it. Okay, so let's see our page right now. And if I go and show this, if we go to our home page, you may notice that currently nothing is being found. Here, let me show this right here. So we need to be able to navigate to our add right here. If we go to add, we have an error. So let me go and fix this real quick. Let me see what this may refer to. Okay, so I've actually found the error right here. So let me do this real quick. We actually need to install REST Framework in our installed apps. So be sure to, don't forget to install this. There you go, REST Framework, and we should be good. So I'm just going to make sure that this is installed by making migrations real quick. So let me do that. Python manage.py. Oh, should be manage.py. There you go. Make migrations. And no change detected. All right, let's just hurry and migrate real quick. Okay, no migration to apply. Let's just go ahead and run the server. Just a little precaution to make sure that everything is installed. And if you refresh, there you go. So that's what I was looking for right there. So now we're able to add in a person. So don't forget to install your REST framework in order to enable this. Okay, so now we could try and add in a person in this case. So for the person, be sure that you have application.json selected. Let's create a JSON. So for creating a JSON, we are going to put something in a set of curly braces. And a set of curly braces could have certain fields. Let's say, for example, I'll have a first name. So the first name will be put in quotes because that's the name of the field. We'll put a colon, and we'll say the name in quotes as well. Maybe the first name will be Jared. All right. So let's also have a last name right here. We'll say maybe something like Johnson. There you go. So that should work out nicely. And let's also have an age right here. And for integers, we don't need to put them in quotes. So you could just say something like 20 and post. So you can see that we were able to successfully do the request. So you can see all the fields right here. You can even see HTTP 200 OK. That means that the request was able to push through. Okay, so we see all the fields right here, and that is perfect. So the next thing to do is maybe we could have another person to add. So let's say another person. We could do a first name, and we'll say maybe Val, perhaps. There you go. And then let's make their last name right here. And we're going to say something like Ivory, I guess. Just trying to think of something off the top of my head. Okay. And now we have an age. So for their age, we could say something like 34. Yeah, that should work out, and post it. And there you go. So now we have a second one. You can actually see it right here from our auto-generated ID. It has an ID of 2. Now, currently, we are unable to see the persons right now. We're going to save that for the next episode. But hopefully, this has helped you and has given you a bit of context as to how to create requests in Django REST Framework. So hopefully you could tune in for the next video. And we will see you for the next episode to talk about the get and update request. Till then, thank you so much for watching, and we will see you again soon.